Hi, this is Valeria and you're watching one video on YouTube.
And today we're going to talk about why I chose this camera above all the rest. Plus, we're going to get into the kit lens controversy, and that's all coming up. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. So this video is intended to showcase my thoughts on the user experience with the FX6. So hopefully by the end of the video, you can see if this camera is right for you and your uses. Weighing in at about 2.3 to 2.4 pounds body alone, it's really not that heavy of a cinema camera. It's highly portable. Vis-a-vis the FX9, you're looking at about 4.4 pounds of body alone. I like a camera that I can take with me, and I can take it, it's travel friendly. I have a beautiful Pelican case at home for the FX6, but it was so big, it was hard to travel with it. So for right now, I'm using your traditional camera bag. I'm able to fit the FX6 along with lenses, and I don't have any issue. With the FX9, I think I would have had a lot more issue, and I don't think I would have been able to travel as easily with that camera body. So on to ergonomics of the camera. I want to go over some of the design strengths and flaws of the FX6. Now a lot of these have already been well publicized, like the top handle. When you remove the top handle from the cinema body, you lose all audio, minus a very small audio port that can only be used for scratch audio. And while this audio is by no means professional, I have used it time to time to reference different shots. Now, I think this is a huge oversight on Sony's part. It doesn't really affect me in my use cases a lot because I don't put this on a gimbal. Another design flaw, also audio related, is the shotgun mic port, which only fits a certain number of microphones, and the port itself is flimsy. It's flimsy so much that I've actually ordered a part to replace it eventually, which is this part made by Sideways. I'll put a link in the description below to it. Now, as far as design strengths go, I really like the side handle of the FX6. This is a really excellent grip to use because you can really grab a hold of the camera and you can hold it essentially one-handed, even with a fairly heavy and robust lens on the end of it, and it's totally fine. Now let's move on to the internal electronic variable ND system. Now, I've got some footage from Bebek that I'll get to in a moment, but it would suffice to say the internal electronic variable ND system surpassed even my highest and loftiest of expectations. So I'm out here filming on the Bosphorus, on the European side, and if you look over on the other side of the water, that is the Asian side. I've been filming with the Sony FX6 today using that variable ND system with very bright and sunny conditions, especially earlier in the day. And one of the great things about the FX6's internal variable ND system is that auto ND capability that allows you to change locations dynamically and seamlessly with no anomalies or color casting. Having worked with variable ND filters in the past on mirrorless cameras, I've always found it to be a very difficult thing to film with because you get color cast on footage. Even with the top of the line variable ND filters that just screw on the end of your lens, they do leave those anomalies on the footage, whereas the internal ND system on the FX6 does not. So the FX6 lacks an internal stabilization system as it had to make room for the internal electronic variable ND system. One thing I will say about Sony's internal stabilization though, at least from the a7S III, is I don't really mind losing it that much. Not just because the internal electronic variable ND system is so good, but also because the internal stabilization on the a7S III didn't really impress me much. So this is using the a7S III with active stabilization, and that is the strongest in-camera stabilization you can do on the a7S III. Now in my view, this stabilization, while it certainly has benefits on the camera, I would still say that the stabilization is not at the same level as the Panasonic S1 and the S1H. Now there are a few options. One is using Catalyst Browse in post-production to stabilize footage. And in my experiences, you can get really amazing results from Catalyst Browse. The only issue is time, as it does require some time and investment in order to get those results. One thing I like to do is use a stabilized lens in lieu of Catalyst Browse to have footage that's more or less stabilized right out of camera. So with the lack of internal stabilization on the FX6, I took to the streets of Istanbul to test with lens-only stabilization of that 28 to 135 power zoom. And you can see the results here. So color science is a very important topic when it comes to cameras, obviously. And the a7S III and the Alpha One and the FX3, the FX6 and the FX9 all have different color science. They might be small incremental differences, but they're differences nonetheless. With the FX6, I would say out of all 5 of those cameras, I'll put the FX6 a little bit below the FX9, just because the skin tones appear to be reproduced a little bit better on the FX9 than the FX6. However, when it comes to, say, the a7S III, the FX3, I do think the FX6 is above that because the tones tend to not get as saturated quickly and have a little bit less of that orange look you get from mirrorless cameras. So for me, the FX6 is a little bit of a middle ground between the FX9 and then the mirrorless cameras. When it comes to highlight roll-off, I was surprised the a7S III outperformed the FX6 just straight out of the camera. Highlight roll-off, in my eyes, is better. It's smoother on the a7S III. The FX6 tends to lose a little bit of that nuance unless you go into post-production and you can bring out the information in those highlights. So the white balance tool leaves a little bit to be desired on the FX6 compared to the a7S III, as the a7S III has a target hitbox where you can pinpoint precisely where you want to set your white balance. On the FX6, you have to cover essentially the whole picture with that white balance source in order to get what you need. However, using the FX6 and setting white balance in a multitude of different environments, it's only given me genuine problems, maybe 1 out of every 100 times. So what is this kit lens controversy? So the kit lens controversy, at least from my point of view, is that the FX6 would have really benefited from being paired initially with that 28 to 135 f4. Now, when YouTube reviews of the FX6 were first released, I couldn't help but notice that in each and every one of those YouTube reviews that were panning the system, each and every one of those reviews was using the FX6 in tandem with that 24 to 105 f4. And I totally understand, having used that system myself for a brief period. Doesn't make any sense. You have all these servo zoom options on the cinema body itself, yet you're having to use this lens for all intents and purposes intended for a stills camera. So that's the kit lens controversy. Why did Sony choose to pair the FX6 with a lens that really doesn't benefit or complement it, and at the same time still pair the 28-135 with the FX9, I find that interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So when it comes to understanding the FX6 menu system from the standpoint of the FX9, there won't be any learning curve on your part because both cameras were developed by the same department at Sony. When it comes to the A7S III and moving from that camera to the FX6, there is a significant learning curve. Now you have full menu where you hold down onto the menu button and that'll give you all the options, and you have a quick menu button. There are also many custom buttons that you can fill in to make your life a little bit easier on this camera system. Admittedly, less buttons than the FX9, given the FX6 has less real estate than the FX9. There are 16 custom LUTs you can load onto the FX6. When it comes to filming modes, you have Cine EI and Custom. When you want Cinetone, you've got to go into Custom. Cine EI really opens you up to the full potential of the FX6 and really taking advantage of the dynamic range. You have autofocus face priority on the A7S III. On the FX6, you have autofocus face priority and face only. On the A7S III, you have touch tracking. On the FX6, you really don't. You have flexible spot, which is a little bit more difficult and complicated to use, and I would have liked touch tracking to be used on the FX6, and hopefully in a future firmware update, Sony will implement that change. Frame rate and resolution options have more in common with the A7S III than the FX9, and here are those frame rate and resolution options. So one thing I would like to see implemented into the system is the ability to do 4K 120p without switching over to S&Q mode. It's something we can do on the A7S III, but not the FX6, and I would like Sony to maybe implement that in a future firmware update. Speaking of firmware updates, the FX6 is now capable of doing 4K 100 and 120p, slow motion, RAW, and XAVCI, all of which go through the SDI out port, and you will need a 12G SDI cable in order to use that feature. To record internally on the FX6, you will need memory cards, and memory card slots are located at the back of the camera. When you open the door, you have two options, either SD or CF Express Type A. For my uses, I use the CF Express Type A. And the reason I recommend CF Express Type A is it's a very dependable form of media. File transfers on these CF Express Type A cards are usually much faster than SD cards. And really the only disadvantage to this media is the cost. However, I will put a link in the description below to the cards that I use and that I recommend. To record externally on the FX6, you have SDI and HDMI ports on the back of the camera. You also have timecode where you can toggle between in and out. Now I got the chance to test out different frame rate options, and you can take a look at that footage here. So I hope you enjoyed that footage, and I will put a link in the description below to raw video files from that shoot. Also, I want to briefly discuss the dual sensitivity ISO system on the FX6. And this is not to be confused with the dual native ISO system found on the FX9 and Venice. I found it to be very convenient to have a custom button where I could toggle between the lower and the upper ISO levels. My second favorite feature on the FX6 is noise reduction control. On the FX6, you have the option to turn off noise reduction completely. And if you wish to have noise reduction on, you can choose between low, medium, and high. I use low and medium on the FX6's noise reduction, and even if I were to set it to high, it doesn't match the intensity of the A7S III's noise reduction. On the A7S III, there is no noise reduction control, and oftentimes that would hinder the final image's quality. To achieve the highest quality image, it's always advisable to import footage into Premiere or Final Cut and to apply neat video onto your footage. Reducing noise in that way almost always guarantees a better quality image than using noise reduction on camera. So before I considered the Sony FX6, I also considered the Alpha 1, and that was a camera that was really appealing to me because I'd used it many times in the past. It has fantastic photographic capabilities, and the 8K resolution was something I thought for a while I could make use out of. Inevitably, I realized I wasn't going to use the 8K resolution on a frequent basis. Besides that, I really wanted to use an electronic internal variable ND system like the one on the FX6. And that's also why I briefly considered the FX9, because it shares that internal electronic variable ND system. The FX9 also has the Super 35 4K mode. However, I realized the FX6 had most of the useful features of the FX9 in a lower price camera. There was also the Red Komodo 6K and the Canon C70. Both cameras are within the budgetary spectrum of the Sony FX6. Now the Red Komodo 6K was appealing for a moment because it can do 6K resolution, which is something that I would like to use. While I find 8K resolution to be a little bit too much of a good thing, 6K resolution is kind of that sweet spot for my uses. However, the Red Komodo 6K lacks an internal electronic variable ND system, and while you can use variable ND filters on top of your lenses, I always find that to be very problematic. Red also has the infrared pollution aspect to it, which sometimes can affect footage. The Canon C70, on the other hand, has a very impressive DGO sensor and mini XLRs on the camera body, but the form factor and the lack of a really good internal ND system was what drew me to the FX6. So is the Sony FX6 right for you? If you're looking for a Sony a7S III in a cinema body that provides solutions for noise reduction control and ND filters, then this might be the camera. If, however, losing things like top handle audio is an issue, then maybe not. But at the end of the day, the Sony FX6 is a logical midway point between the a7S III and the FX9. It is both an a7S III in a cinema body and a shrunken down FX9. And with features like 4K 120p, timecode, servo functionality, noise reduction control, and an internal electronic variable ND system, all of which fits into a lightweight portable cinema body, I think this camera provides a lot of value and utility to a variety of different uses. But that's all for now, and as always, if you found this video helpful or insightful, give a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, comment below, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.